Well, to say that we are operating in a period of uncertainty is an understatement right now. We have seen shifts at the federal level that have included rerouting or axing funding streams or offices. And these shifts don't just hit the federal level, they reverberate through to states, localities, to philanthropy, and also the organizations that are on the ground doing this work. I'm sure many of you have stories, hopefully not a lot of horror stories, but definitely stories that you could tell. You know, the reactions to these shifts have really run the gamut, and I'm sure we will continue to see it. We have seen states, for example, states and philanthropy and localities doubling down and kind of filling those gaps where populations or programs have been essentially abandoned. We have seen some temporary filling of gaps, but without a lot of uncertainty about how long that will last. We've seen some kind of holding steady, and then we've also seen retreats. Again, I know that people in this room can probably tell some of those stories and are in the middle of coping with them. So I do want to say, though, as unsettling as those shifts can be, they really can serve as a reminder to help us step back and to think about the efficacy of our long-standing ways of doing business. Where, for example, have we had to kind of contort our systems and our programs just to meet the objectives of a funding stream that is providing diminishing returns? And is that a place that we really want to go back to? Are there puzzle pieces that we are patching together with glue and tape and other, string ties in order to create programs? And at the end of the day, they're not really adding up to the sum of their parts. Again, stories that many of you can tell in your own lives. And where have states and localities really stepped up to lessen some of those contortions and to build approaches to talent development that could and should be adapted elsewhere? I today get to share a stage with a group of 3 workforce champions, Rachel, Brent, and Katie, and they have collectively very deep experience and expertise across federal, state, and local workforce systems. They have done work to inform and administer workforce policies, to research and analyze what does and doesn't work in workforce, and also to make sense of the various funding sources and priorities and inputs as leaders of workforce organizations. So I think we're gonna have a fun, I was saying, like, this conversation, the conversation we have today could be completely different if we did it tomorrow. And so we were gonna see where this goes, but I think you'll walk away with some good insights, kind of thinking across federal, state, local, and how some of these shifts are maybe giving us a chance to step back and think a bit. But to get us started, so I want to jump right into a recent report that Rachel authored. It was released over the summer, called America's Missing Productivity Strategy and R&D Approach to Workforce Development. Please check it out if you haven't read it yet. And we were joking, I said, I think we could just do a dramatic reading of some passages from that report to say that it struck a nerve, or a few nerves, as I was reading it and rereading it, really saying yes, is another understatement. So Rachel, there's a term that I think will resonate here that you use, low resource, low efficacy equilibrium in this report. So can you talk a bit about what that means, and how do limited resources lead to weak outcomes?
Happy to. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be in New York. I'm from the area, so always great to be back in New York City, especially this time of year. Maybe I'll zoom out a little bit first and give some context for those who haven't had the chance to read the paper yet. One of the things that I start by laying out is I think in the US we actually asked the workforce development system to do a lot of things to solve a lot of really hard social problems, actually. We're like, how do we solve this problem of out of school, out of work youth? How do we address adults who have been dislocated because of trade? How do we think about long-term unemployed adults? There's a lot. Those are some pretty big and hard problems. and important ones for sure. But sometimes it seems like job training is kind of said, everyone is just like, oh, here's the answer. Job training, job training, job training, to these really hard, big structural problems. But the other thing I think that has happened because of that framing is that federal policymakers especially, but policymakers in some ways across the board, basically have thought about workforce development as an anti-poverty strategy. And what that means is that they think about it as kind of like something that's over here for people who are struggling, for people who are disadvantaged. It's not for me, it's not for my kids, it's for other people. And that's where this low resource, low efficacy equilibrium comes in. So basically what we've seen over the last few decades is that the US workforce development system has been like consistently structurally underfunded. We're almost last in OECD of other advanced economies in terms of what we spend on what you call active labor market policies. These are the things like job training and employment services that help support people connecting to jobs. The US looks very we spend almost no money compared to our peers. And the amount that we've spent has actually been declining over time on a per capita basis on the federal level. And so what I think has happened, and I should say I shouldn't claim credit for that term. I stole it and cited it in the paper from Harry Holzer, who's a economist and was the chief economist at the US Department of Labor back in the day. He came up with the idea, but I build it out in some more detail, which is like we have these low levels of funding. It becomes very fragmented in terms of what we spend money on. Say if we have $2,000 in a job training voucher from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act system, and we know that the programs at work cost a lot more than $2,000 per head, what we're asking is basically like, we're almost like doomed to fail, right? You repeat the system where underfunded, fragmented, the results look pretty mixed. The evaluations, research evaluations, I'd say, of federally funded workforce development have been not terrible, but not overwhelmingly positive. And then you get into this cycle where it becomes harder for policymakers to then justify putting more money into what they perceive to be a failing system, and the cycle repeats. So I guess what I argue in this paper, and one of the things I'm thinking about right now, is like, how could you completely break out of that paradigm and that broken cycle? And the idea that I throw out there is thinking about research and development in the United States, which instead of being viewed as a social service or welfare or anti-poverty, is historically been viewed as very key to US competitiveness, to US productivity growth, to our national security. And unlike workforce development, which I said we rank almost last on our spending, we lead the world in our R&D investments. It's viewed as a public good. It's viewed as spending that doesn't just benefit the direct recipient of the funding, but actually benefits the economy at large. And so I throw out some ideas of what would that actually look like. It's not just a reframing, but it's a rethinking of the whole tools of how we do business. So I'm excited to dive into that deeper and to hear the thoughts of my panelists who have lots of experience in the field, both seeing the constraints and the opportunities of how the current system works.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think with that base laid, Brent and Katie, given your roles right now, it would be good if you could each share just a moment or an experience that has sharpened that understanding of the catch-22 that we're in, where we have this cycle of underinvestment leading to weak results and justifying more underinvestment. What has that looked like in your work?
Well, it doesn't look good, and let me just build a little bit on what Rachel's saying, because I think it helps get us out of the trap to some extent, which is, even when the workforce system, a lot of reauthorizations over several decades, going back to 1963, the Manpower Defense Act, which was what WIOA originally was, it made some pretty big assumptions about what the workforce system's role would be in the labor market that have really changed since the late 1960s, like some other things. The two big ones that stick in my mind is the workforce system has a lot of missions, a lot of things it tries to accomplish, but it's really, I always distilled it down during my time leading the Employment and Training Administration, two missions. It's a firefighter and a construction worker. The workforce system gets investment, significant investment, when things are on fire. The pandemic, the Great Recession, these are just the most recent examples. And what you end up with is pouring money under a brittle infrastructure. Then, when things aren't on fire, that's when the kind of more social mission comes in. But the workforce system has a universalist setting in that anybody could lose their job, anybody could walk in and access employment services, even folks during the administration I served in who were not citizens. The point being that the system has these two faces, and I think we have to get precise about what are we trying to kind of tackle in terms of the weakness of it. And I would say you need to have these counter-cyclical or even economic disaster-based systems that are there to serve people well on their worst days. And that's at the end of the day with the workforce system. And the work you all do is you're at the end of the day first there for people on their worst days, the day they lose the job, the day that they can't find that opportunity, that next leg up. In many parts of the country, the plant is closing. That's so much of what our workforce system is invested in to do, because it has assumed back to the 1960s that the social mission, how you bring people who are in low income, low wage jobs, people who have been long-term unemployed, into something that is already out there. And that already out there used to be really high quality post-secondary education that if you could get through, you were pretty much guaranteed a good job and a career. Show me where that's the case now as a guarantee. It assumed a high density unionization in the labor market. Labor unions ensured that you didn't even have to have a college degree to be able to get a good job. And the workforce system in the 1960s also assumed that employers were actively invested in jointly investing in workforce development. The size of joint training programs back in the 1960s, 70s versus what happened in the 80s, 90s to today is vastly different. So the workforce system was never designed to deliver the quality stuff. Let me just be very blunt about that. It was always there to be an access point and a support point to what was working in the labor market. We are at a very different moment right now. And I think the mission of the workforce system, which makes Rachel's work incredibly timely, is now what are we trying to build to create affordable pathways to good jobs and careers in this labor market, in this moment. And so when Congress would constantly put squeezing metrics across titles of programs, because before they wanted to consolidate everything, there was an interest in putting very tight, short-term transactional metrics on the system. They were measure, measure, measure. It narrowed and narrowed and narrowed the tightness of the scope of what that system was supposed to do. Now it's, all that shit doesn't work, let's blow it all up, consolidate it, and start from scratch. So maybe that's the title of the session, it's a moment of uncertainty. but I think that's the space this conversation needs to start getting into, not does the workforce system work? It's a funding source, it's a platform, but I pressure us to keep in mind firefighter, but that builder mission, that R&D alignment, that's where I think we have a lot of work to do as a field and as a country and as a system to really recognize how do we change those preconditions the workforce system is supposed to be able to offer. Access to affordable post-secondary education that leads to mobility, joint investment between public and private sector in the development of the talent of the future, and that first leg up for young people in our labor market. Those are things that I think we should be really focused on building in this kind of R&D mindset.
Great.
Right here.
Let me jump in with two ideas that I had that are wildly on the tactical compared to the strategic here. And so where's that catch-22 really show up? I want to point out an article that came out in the Times about Equifax, which I think most of you use, or the Work Number. They are raising prices because they realize that everyone's going to need to, in the country, get their Medicaid and their SNAP validations. So where is the system to support more money for the Equifax? Or where is, the city negotiating with Equifax? Instead, each one of you will have to pay more. So that's a catch-22. Suddenly they're going to say you're not doing as well because you're spending more money on rent, on your health insurance, and on Equifax. Okay, let's just that's a barrier that could be completely removed. As far as I'm concerned, the city of New York should go in and do that negotiating for us rather than passing it down. Or come up with an actual DOL system that would do it instead of a private industry. But anyway, so the other catch-22 might be something like, I actually think that HRA, and Scott French was just out here, in their new PACE contract, did a really good job of acknowledging the tiers, which is more rapid attachment, more investment with some training, and then an individual who might have mental health barriers or currently just had a new baby, or something else is going on in their lives where they need more at that time. So again, the catch-22 is exactly what these guys are talking about, which is that treating everyone exactly the same. So I want to applaud the new PACE contract for showing those tiers, but what I want to encourage is different levels of time, patience, and payment that will correspond with those.
Thank you. Brent, I want to go back to your work at ETA and continuing now with CareerWise around apprenticeship, and recognizing that when we think about some of the strategies being supported at the federal level, apprenticeship, even if the definition is maybe getting a little contorted or stretched, apprenticeship has, I think, some currency there. And so if you can talk a little bit about the ways in which states have been able to build capacity, what you've seen across the country. So build capacity in order to scale apprenticeships. What has been working, and are there things that states need to do? I think many of you in this room know that apprenticeship is also a key focus for the current Adams administration, and I've also kind of wondered what's that interaction with city if it's not really working well with state. But anyway, we can maybe get to that point. But
sure, no, and apprenticeship has not completely scaled up, so whoever does have the answer out there should let us know. But I think that a couple of things about this, and welcome my colleagues to jump in. The apprenticeship, as many of us in this room know, there's kind of usually two conversations you need to have. Obviously, strong tradition in the building construction trades. That infrastructure is there to scale up with demand as it happens. I think obviously New York City is a leader with the Apprenticeship Readiness Collective to actually make sure that there's clear, equitable pathways into that work, although that's always unfinished business. Let's just be honest about that, given looking at the numbers. And then there's the world of the kind of growing non-traditional space, which is basically every other industry sector. And just the core thing is that there is not the same infrastructure to scale apprenticeship programs in these non-traditional fields where there's not a strong tradition, whether that's healthcare, manufacturing, information technology, financial services, wherever it might be. And so states, I think that's their enterprise. That's where a lot of the federal dollars have gone, is to be able to support this non-traditional infrastructure to grow. I think we have to have some empathy for the fact that apprenticeship is a major commitment and investment on behalf of public and private sector partners involved. So it takes time and it takes investment to make that happen. I think, just to put bluntly, the keys to how we're going to scale it, though, is we don't need to build a brand new infrastructure. The states that have been successful at this, and we lead a coalition at CareerWise called the Education to Apprenticeship Accelerator. It's a coalition of 10 states, industry and labor organizations that are trying to attack this, is they've integrated apprenticeship into their mainline education systems. And I think you get out of this idea that apprenticeship is some different form of education and training. At the end of the day, my view, it's a better way to do post-secondary. Not all the students are throwing frisbees on the lawn, and no one should have to work a low-wage job or drop out of the labor market to get training and skills. And so at the end of the day, how we look at our community colleges, how we look at our career tech ed programs in our high schools, New York City, where we work here, the The entire partnership we have with New York City Public Schools for the Future Ready initiative is that example of that type of infrastructure that gives you a platform to scale. So I would just say integration with education systems, because it improves those education outcomes and the economic outcomes of students, is the key, and where states are engineering in a lot of different ways. And I think there's pockets of that happening, particularly in this city here in New York. The other thing I'll say is demand. You can't grow apprenticeships without demand. And that's true for traditional and non-traditional. So how do we look at these policy nudges? How do you look at public authority? How do you look at apprenticeship utilization in a way that is actually going to promote apprenticeship, not to just be used on projects, but for employers in this city to see that that's something that they can take advantage of, particularly if providing some sort of contracted service for the city. Huge shout out to NYC Talent. This city has led on public sector apprenticeship pathways. It is a model for the country on this, and I think that's key as well. So policy authority and learning from the trades in these other sectors about how to build apprenticeship utilization into public investments is key too.
Rachel, how has, if at all, apprenticeship figured into your research around, you know, using an R&D framework and trying to disrupt that low resource, low efficiency equilibrium?
Yeah, I guess I'd say the biggest area where I've been thinking about and working on this has been, Brent mentioned integration with the education system. The R&D mentality is built on the concept of integration more with economic development and having priority industries. So when I look at states around the country right now, I think there's some interesting examples of how you can embed apprenticeship into your economic development strategy, right? So if you've selected priority industries that you're really focused on and say you're attracting new businesses into your state, how is apprenticeship part of the conversation on day one as part of the conversations to bring a company or into your state? Are you putting apprenticeship on the table? I think is an important kind of tactic that I think is interesting. I also, I think one thing that apprenticeship highlights that I talk a lot about in the R&D paper is the need for different types of tools. I mean, Brent referenced quickly, but the federal funding that we have for apprenticeship is mostly, it's small dollars, and it's mostly aimed at helping to start new programs or get things off the ground and catalyze, which I think is important. But this idea of having it's not just different tools for different populations. I'm thinking a lot about different tools for different use cases, right? So we might have new programs that need to get started and we're trying to catalyze something. So what's the right set of funding for that? And then there's the how do you translate something from early startup into actually being able to sustain and scale if it's working, and that's a different set of funding. So in apprenticeship on the federal level, I think there's things to be learned from states that have apprenticeship tax credits that then are able to use that as a way to sustain and grow over time once you've actually gotten something off the ground that looks successful. So I think there is a lot of experimentation happening around the country on this regard right now that's interesting and would be encouraging folks in New York to watch.
I want to shift a little bit. So Katie has led workforce strategy at the city level, both in the mayor's office, at two different city agencies. And you've been on the front lines of where those federal and those state policies are coming down the pike and being interpreted, and the city is then set to implement. What, if you had the ears of federal policymakers right now, are there any takeaways or anything that you would say to them just about how that flow either leaves out certain communities or overlooks certain aspects that I guess make that implementation on the ground in the city difficult?
Yes, I'm sure I do. I also, now as a provider and a nonprofit provider, I'm, even farther downstream of this. But I think that some of the big catch-22s we've talked about, some of the big strategies, but I think really when you think about what we need to do and what we want to get out there is that we need to make sure that the funding is getting to people. I mean, I'm going to just sort of talk about, I guess, I'm sort of more focused on the city, but making sure that our contracts are paid, making sure that this is really happening, just the basics. But if I was going to say something for the federal, I really did encourage, when I was on the WDB, that we do push more training. I do think that funding higher value training and using a bigger part of our workforce system in that way was something that I personally was a fan of. And so if I were to say, how are we going to redo the system, we were talking about this in the back, I was for the 50%. So I would say that's one of the things I would tell them, which is moving WIOA from, I think it's at 20% now, but to 50% training.
I shared in our prep with, especially with Rachel and Brent, who aren't operating in New York City all the time, the city has bought into sector strategies. This has been part of our work, going back 20 years with the Bloomberg administration and setting up sector desk at SBS and creating industry partnerships. And it's like we know the language, we breathe it, and at the same time, it feels like we also find ourselves, and we have the research documenting this is what it costs to run an effective program, and yet that gulf still exists. I just, in thinking through how the R&D framework can maybe help to illuminate those goals or help us make hard decisions about where to focus our workforce efforts, I wonder if we hone in, for example, on sector strategies as something that has promise, but when it's underfunded, definitely, is going to fall short. You?
Yeah, I mean, lots to say on this. As a researcher, someone who's followed, look, when I started getting into workforce development, everyone was like, look at sectoral employment programs. These are the ones that we need to highlight. And yet, I think my sense of this is we've had people saying for 20 years, like, oh, there's a set of programs that really work, and we've basically had no mechanism really to like channel more public funds towards programs that have shown to work and have like really good results. That's my sense of it, is like there's kind of a disconnect between buy-in around saying that we think there's a set of programs that really work and we have some ideas about the factors, and then actually like moving resources to be able to help programs that show successful results scale. So I mean, the R&D framework, one of the things I talk about is we have this cycle of kind of like one-off competitive grants that are more geared towards the idea of being able, I think, to try new things, maybe, or do one-off kind of activities, essentially. That's what the structure supports. One analogy that I've been interested in from R&D, so I don't know if folks know DARPA, it's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. Yes. It's like a research entity that funds important technologies and researchers that might have defense applications in the United States, focus very heavily on innovation. It helps seed things like the internet. When they structure funding, they use kind of interesting milestone-based types of arrangements. So here's some seed funding to get something going. Then there's going to be various points in time where we look at how it's going, and not in static old metrics that you set at the outset and you can't revisit, flexible ways of evaluating that impact. But the important thing is that you have points in time where you look and say, is this working or is it not? And if it's working, let's unlock more dollars for you to continue and be able to scale, rather than waiting for the next cycle and applying for the next competition, and in the meantime, the research might die and you lost all of the momentum that you had built. But it also has the flip side of the coin, which is to say, if something is not working, then you got that seed funding, you got that innovation funding, and then sort of the results don't look good, and this isn't promising, and the stream might get cut off. So I haven't really seen this yet necessarily like deployed in a workforce context, but I think there's a lot of potential to think through ways that we could structure funding differently that would be both better for providers to not have to go through the gauntlet every time, and also really deliver on that the promise of what we say we want to see, which is that if something works, there's a route to scaling it, which I think in practice has not really been delivered on in most places across the country.
Just to that, the greatest unfunded mandate in workforce development is that we owe a support sector strategies. And I think that we want boards were designed to be these strategic entities, but the plumbing and the compliance that they have to administer for programs that they push down because they have to providers across a community is at the end of the day what they are paid to do. And so I think just this R&D frame point, the idea that you could be using looser, giving regions and states more opportunities to kind of align and build things towards outcomes is important. But the R&D frame, I think, is most important for the D part, in the sense that there is not a lot of money out there because the system assumes that there's great high-quality providers. And so all of its funding structures are paying for those high-quality outcomes immediately. Back to my earlier point, in our workforce landscape today, the reason those examples are hard to find is there aren't. We need innovation and investment in new types of workforce interventions and programs in this country. And the system's not set up to do that. And the infrastructure by which you build them is a sector-based approach. So what we do with the funding is important, but also just, I think we have to be much more tailored towards the idea that there is a need for a generational investment in that type of innovation.
You know, and I would just add, you know, recently at Goodwill, we are working in the Bronx, and it's very exciting, but I do see this construction of different pockets of workforce systems, whether it be at universities, the Workforce One, or EDC. But then if we each build one story, we'll never get to story 2, we'll never get to story 3 if we're thinking about a building. So instead, we're spending a lot of money in the Bronx, but we're not building it on top of each other. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about with the development. How could we integrate? How could we really be building it together? And if you think about, you know, these key industries, you've got casinos, you've got the market, you've got warehouses, you've got transportation, and instead each one is, and green jobs, each one is going to do a little bit instead of them going all the way.
There's an extended panel on, you know, almost turning or just, I don't know, dismissing that idea, that mantra of, oh, philanthropy invest in innovation and government invest in scale. And I'm feeling that that is less and less the case. And are we missing employers and other parties out there? But like I said, that's an entirely different panel. But so many of these comments have had me thinking about what is that proper role. We have about 2 minutes left, and so I want to give each of you an opportunity. You can pick your target, or if you feel like it's universal. So if it's to federal policymakers, to governors, or we have a mayor-elect who will be coming into office in January, about where they should focus on ways to build lasting opportunity for their constituents. What would that be? You can, whoever wants to jump in.
Well,
first.
I have thought about this. So for, I believe someone's on the transition committee. I don't know who, heard that. So for our new mayor here in New York City, you know, a place that I absolutely love, and I love the workforce system and all the folks that are here, but I really would encourage us to think about taking this moment of opportunity where we're honoring several people who are retiring and changing. I would really take this opportunity for the CEO Council, the Partnership for New York, ABNY, and the WDB to really collaborate and become one super organization of big employers and put the WDB under EDC.
Wow.
I will build on that by saying, at the same time, we can create superstructures, but if we don't deal with the plumbing, and that is not sexy 100-day stuff, but it doesn't mean anything if you build a big new entity, which we see happen, and not the structural issues are dealt with for how we move resources to the right places,
100%.
the programs that can be accessed. And I would say that, you know, particularly in this city, but all over America, a real focus on, and going to the sector point, The care economy and healthcare, I think, is going to be really key because there's going to be a lot of pain points, but that is a huge portion of population and a lot of the mobility challenges that exist in the city. Great partners here with 1199 that you could be working with on that front. And I would just continue to double down on youth. Tomorrow's affordability crisis or today's affordability crisis is born much younger. And I think this city needs a youth strategy.
I'll build on Brent's comments a little bit. When I'm talking to regions and states around the country right now, I think it can't be understated the importance of like picking some priorities. I think this is going to be key to breaking the low resource, low efficacy equilibrium piece of this. Yes, the plumbing there's a lot of problems with the plumbing. I think fixing the plumbing across an entire system in a few years' time is going to be really, really challenging. So how can we pick some places to start where we can make some good bets, and maybe it's healthcare here in New York, on a set of jobs that we think are likely to grow, pay good wages without a BA, and have a real strategy and mobilize some new resources towards a targeted focus that gets everyone on the around the table kind of rowing in the same direction, and then be able to hopefully see good results from that can be expanded across the system. I think especially in this environment where the federal resources are not looking like they're going to be flooding in enormous quantity in the coming years, probably safe to say, like, how can we lay the groundwork by showing some things that really work that will allow you to then build upon, hopefully in a moment where there are more resources coming.
Great. Well, with that, thank you, everyone. I hope this was thought-provoking. Please read Rachel's paper. I'm sure the coalition will make it available. And I'm going to just say, reach out to any of these just champions and experts. Thank you.